accounting, for maybe your savings account or your checking account or your individual retirement account, your children's college education. Just kind of think of it in that kind of a context, and compare the measures and objectives that we're holding against these accounts in the same way you would your own accounts. And I think you'll find that an interesting way to look at all this. We're going to really divide this program up into two major sections: credits and debits, or DSAs, they call them in the Portland Harbor, discounted service acre years. And then we're really honing in on performance standards for vegetation, a very narrow focus for the purposes of this presentation. And the habitats you'll see in that coordinate classification side view diagram on the right of this slide, in the kinds of habitats that we're looking at. There is a currency that's being used in the Portland Harbor. It's called habitat equivalency analysis. That's how these DSAs, or credits and debits. And by the way, credits and debits and DSAs are interchangeable terms in this presentation. And it's put together by the National Marine Fisheries Service, and it was designed to help recover habitats that were damaged by hazardous materials such as oil spills. And it uses habitat indicator species, in this case Chinook salmon, and then ranks the different habitat value scores on a range between 0 and 1, with 0 being no value and 1 being optimum value. And then it applies these certain capitalization or discount rates depending on how much time it takes to recover these resources in terms of debits, or if you're talking about creating credits for work to offset those debits, then it's looking at the existing habitat versus what the target benefited habitat will be after they apply all their remedial measures to it, and the amount of time that'll take. And really what they're measuring is the difference between the recovery and the damage, or that delta HIA. And then of course that all equates down into that currency, or DSAs, or credits and debits, as we talked about earlier. This is really the formula that's used. Basically, you can see at the bottom right, you're taking that resource recovered service, and you're subtracting the damaged service from that, and you're dividing that by that rate, and that gives you the credit or the debit. And then you multiply that by whatever acreage is involved to get a total value for those credits or debits. In the Portland Harbor, this was done by an expert panel, and this gives you a table that shows you the scores. They use their best professional judgment and literature reviews to bring these scores to the Portland Harbor use of this system, use of this HIA system. And I just wanted to show that there's a whole large number of variables that goes into these kinds of scores, and there's many different models and how this is done. This is just a very narrow snippet of one of these models, but it really is done focusing in on the Chinook salmon and their life cycle requirements in relation to the habitat that's available to them to fulfill those life cycle requirements. This was not an empirical study done actually in the harbor, but really, again, it was an expert panel using their best professional judgment to come up with these scores. This is a excerpt of an Excel spreadsheet that I put together after having to go through quite a few different sources of material, because I couldn't find all this in one particular source. And basically the real main point of this slide is to illustrate that I had to go through a number of different documents. I had to go on quite a few searches for those documents. I actually ended up doing a what's kind of like a state version of the Federal Information Act, Freedom of Information Act request to get these documents. And then even after I got all of the documents, things were still, and and piecing those documents together and manually taking the data from PDF files and putting them into an Excel spreadsheet. Even then, this discount rate was missing, so I had to do some algebra to treat it as a solve variable in algebra formula to get this discount rate, so I could come up with these correct values that they had given me here. And that basically, and really the point here is to say that I shouldn't have had to do all that. This should have already been provided in a digital format, and there's no reason why that it's not provided that way, because they had to do that initially to even get those PDF files, get that data into those PDF files. So we know that data is already out there in these formats somewhere, and it's, you know, there's no good reason that I know of why they couldn't have just provided it straight across with that data as a digital format. And this just shows you that that algebra I had to go use to get that, to get this this discount rate, or this capitalization rate that they're using for these to get these values. Now, there's a question I have here about how they're doing this. I've tried to look at some of the way that these rates are assessed in real estate and in investment strategies for monetary values, to see if there's getting some sort of analog there for this HIA application. The closest I could get is if you took this annual return and divided it up by this discount rate, and to get present value, that would be your DSA right over here. But they're actually using the HIA delta, the difference between recovered and the damage value, and then dividing that by this, and that's not an annual return, that's the whole enchilada. So I don't really understand the logic, and that's a question that I have out to the trustee council. So what's the bottom line here? Well, the bottom line is that these functions that they're looking at, this is not a direct functional assessment. This is a indicator of functional assessment. They're using surrogate indicators of function to develop these functions, to make these statements about value of these functional scores. And they're not empirically testing these in real habitat situations. They're using their best professional judgments to apply, to automatically assign these scores. And so that gives you some reason to hesitate in terms of the validity of using this as a direct functional assessment in terms of credit debit trade transactions. When you really don't have specific absolute scores, you actually have more these coarse ordinal relationships between scores of high, medium, and low. And so in the sense of that being the case, what do those no answers mean? Well, that means you want to have a precautionary principle. And this has been done in the regulatory program for quite a few years. It's quite a well used and adopted principle that you go no less than a 1-to-1 acreage replacement in order to have some confidence you're actually getting the replacement that this equivalency indicates that it can give you. And so there's only really one way that you can get that with confidence, and that is to apply the same habitat assessment methodology to the debits that you do to the credits. And if you can see here that for 5 acres here in the credits, you're getting this much credit. And for 5 acres here with this much debit, you're getting this much debit. And if you subtract the two, that's you're getting a 0. And that means you're getting a 1-to-1 acreage replacement. And if you get less than 1-to-1, if the result is a positive result, you're getting less than 1-to-1. And if it's greater than 1-to-1, greater than 0, excuse me, if it's a negative result, that means you're getting a greater replacement than 1-to-1. But really, what you want to make as a bare minimum, you want a 1-to-1 replacement. So why do we do functional assessments at all if they're not really giving us this absolute measure of credit trade? Well, they're good for a lot of good other reasons. They're helping in land use planning and natural resource planning by giving us ordinal scores and areas that are highly sensitive that we can avoid, or create a higher requirement for replacement if their higher areas are damaged. They help us in our regulations. They're also providing benchmark candidates for setting our performance standards. And they're a work in progress. Maybe someday, hopefully someday, we will actually get to a place where we can be looking at the actual underpinning the processes that are supporting these functions that we're trying to measure. And then at that point in time, we can actually use real functional absolute value measurements, but we're just not there yet. So a price per credit is, once you get these credits, you can assign prices to them and make them, and that's how they're traded. That's proprietary information by the banker, so we can't really see that in the transactions in the ledgers, but we know from different reports that we're getting somewhere in the neighborhood of $70,000 to $125,000 a credit is coming across in these transactions. And basically what that means is that after looking at all the banks, I think we're somewhere in the range between 22 million and $65 million of credits in these banks, and given any one of these banks, depending on how many credits one of them has. That's orders of magnitude in what all the other mitigation banks in Oregon have in terms of credit value. Usually what you're seeing for the same amount of acreage and resource recovery application, you're seeing somewhere between a $1 or $2 million credit value in most of the other banks. And here you're getting between 22 and $65 million worth of value. So what does that mean? Well, one thing it means, I would say, is that if you're on the trustee council and you have a mitigation bank sponsor who is claiming that their remedial measures are too expensive, I would ask them the question of, given this is their credit value, how valid of an argument that actually is. And I'm not going to go into that too much more detail, but right now, but I'll leave that open as an open question for now.
John,
So,
can I ask you, is how many credits for each area common knowledge? Like, can we know, like with Sovies Island and PGE and Linton, what each one of their credits were?
yes, as a matter of fact, you can get that both from my website and from another website that the Corps of Engineers has. And I'll show that to you in a few seconds. And I don't mind having questions normally, but we've got a lot of material to get through. But I hope to have time at the end to answer the questions, and also to say that you can contact me anytime and we can drill down into that a lot deeper. But yeah, that's a very good question, and I'll try to get to that real short. So we have two service areas in the Portland Harbor. We have a primary service area, which is this area right here between Solvay Island, right down here, and down here towards these about a river mile 11 on the Willamette down here. And then we have this larger one that goes all the way up to Solvay Island, almost all the way to St. Helens. This is a secondary service area, almost all the way down to Willamette Falls down here in near West Linn, Oregon City area. So basically, one of the major issues with mitigation banks has been that they tend to have very large service areas, and that you're getting your natural resources taken away from one area and put into a consolidated smaller area. But in our particular case in the Portland Harbor, we're actually sort of seeing a reverse result where you're getting debits taken from outside of the Portland Harbor and bringing those values and being replaced inside the Portland Harbor. Albeit most of that replacement is happening right around this consolidated area, right around the confluence of Solvay Island and Multnomah Channel. And then there's another bank down here near Gladstone, near the Clackamas, confluence of the Clackamas and the Willamette, that's trading outside the harbor area, but that's actually benefiting anadromous salmonids that are migrating up through here. So there's an argument to be made that's still benefiting the Portland Harbor. But I think that's an important distinction to understand, but that doesn't mean we can't still do better with getting our concept of trying to get this corridor here passable by some audits in a way that's addressing all their life cycle needs during that period, their migration. And there's a concept here of a multiple site mitigation bank. And we have all these areas identified as possible reclamation or restoration sites in this section of the Portland Harbor. And we have this example in West Eugene where they have multiple sites and one mitigation bank sponsor. This could be done with one or two bank sponsors in the Portland Harbor as well. Well, why do it? Why not do it just as a case-by-case pollutant responsible party at a time? Well, the history of mitigation has been that banks tend to have better quality control and oversight overall than individual mitigation actions. That doesn't necessarily mean individual mitigation actions can't, that's not a mutually exclusive decision, I guess what I'm getting at. You can do both. But I think that it's worthwhile exploring anyway, having this multiple site mitigation bank in the toolbox. So the bottom line here is if you read that bottom line is that we just to make the overarching goal just should be to make intelligent tool selections and apply the best available science and stakeholder input in making our decisions on this. So an accounting issue. Okay, so you can see that this is the Corps' accounting ledger, and I'm going to go back, and it's called the Regulatory In Lieu Fee and Bank Information Tracking System, and this is on a Corps webpage. But in this ledger, you'll see that you have you have authorized credits, and you have release credits, and you have these credit withdrawals. So these are the debits, and these are the credits, or the DSAs that are being added to are added for and have made available for sale. And these are the actual sales, and these are the dates of the sale. This one you'll particularly see it's a negative number. All the withdrawals are negative, but here you have an added one that's a negative number. And what after a certain amount of time, we were able to figure out that they took this out of their basket for the credits that were released for the CERCLA Superfund remediation, and they put it into sort of these dual purpose credits where EPA actually has an oversight role for Clean Water Act, and they can be used for either Clean Water Act or Superfund. But you don't see that here, and it's not anywhere to be found on the core ledger. So here's an alternative that I put together as, and not saying this is the exact right way to do it, but at least have a ledger where we can actually see where it goes, so we can see the running totals. I mean, imagine having your checking account and you go into the bank and ask them, what's this withdrawal for on my checking account? And they'd say, well, we can tell you here, that there is a withdrawal, but we don't know where in your checking account it is, or we don't know where it went to. But we can tell you where it's not located in our ledger. That's all we can tell you. How would you feel about that? I don't think I'd feel very good about it. And I'm just asking them to do the same thing that we'd ask any bank or credit union to do for us, in this ledger. So this is what you're actually seeing in the Ribbits tracking system for the Portland Harbor banks. In every other bank in Oregon, you'll see these folders full of documents, the mitigation bank instrument, all the long-term management plans, the conservation easements, the monitoring plans, the monitoring reports, because they can't even, they're not even supposed to be able to release credits until they pass their performance standards. And you don't know if you passed your performance standard unless you've got a monitoring report and you've got somebody out taking that monitoring report to the site and checking it. And none of this information is available in Ribbits right now. So at a bare minimum, I would ask them to put that information into the Ribbits tracking system. And actually, I would ask EPA to also, for their particular role for the Clean Water Act, to put it in their tracking system that they're developing right now as well. But if for whatever reason EPA decides that they want to use the Corps database, then I would actually have some bare minimum standards that they require, and that is that they provide the acreage along with the physical latitude and longitude coordinates where these different debits are coming out of these credits. And in this, and also the different baskets that the credits are coming out of, not just the one, just not the one circle basket, but for the dual purpose baskets as well. All that be provided. And on this particular, just to get this all on one slide, I'm only showing one withdrawal here, but this is actually a consolidation of about 5 or 6 different withdrawals from this bank. And I'd want each one to have a physical location on the ground so we can see where that withdrawal is coming from, along with the acreage, so we can be sure that's a one-to-one equivalency trade for those acreage and those debits. So a recommendation to the EPA, and they've already really pretty much already said they're going to do this. What's really and what this is a having a graphical user interface on a web page that has their relational database management system and their enterprise geographic geographic database, geographic information system, geodatabase, up and available for people to access the spatial data and the attribute data in the tables for all these different sites to get these kinds of things like acreages and credits and all of these different things. But also what's a little bit debate right now is what those attribute tables actually look like. And I would like to have a little more influence in terms of that development of that system, in terms of what the fields are and what the data they use are to populate those fields. And that's something, that's a conversation that's ongoing right now in terms of that. It's no more specifics about that. So the next thing we're going to be talking about is the vegetation monitoring protocols, really focusing on vegetation because that's more my area of experience and expertise. The main thing on this slide is to note that there's certain definitions for the data and how you collect it. And here you see that you have this midpoint, cover class midpoints. Cover class is basically how much of this area of your sample is covered by these different vegetation types. And then you'd have, if it's say 0 to 5% of that circle is covered, then you give it a midpoint of 2.5. It's 5 to 25, 15, and so on. You sort of get the idea. That's not the only way to do this. There are other ways to do this. You can actually just estimate absolutely what you think the cover is. And then you can do other ways of totaling these covers. You can add them all up as greater than 100%, or you can relativize them to 100%. The idea is that there are many different ways to do this, and can keep on to that thought as we go through this. One of the things I wanted to show here is that in terms of the vegetation sampling strategy that was done at Portland Harbor Bank, they did what's called a stratified systematic random sample. And the stratification comes into this yellow line here, where they took out this vegetation unit and they make this yellow line based on their estimate that all this is similar habitat that they can infer their samples to. And any samples that take along this line can be inferred to represent this entire sample unit. But in order to make that inference statistically viable, they have to make sure the sample is a random sample. And if the first starting point for that random sample is a random, and then and each one is an equal interval after that, they can treat all the samples as random samples statistically. But what they don't give you is they don't give you the location of this particular random, the starting point where they're starting their systematic individual plot intervals. And they don't tell you what the bearing on this is. So if they don't give you that start point coordinate, and they don't give you that bearing, you're not going to be able to go out in the field and find these samples. And then you're not going to be able to do the verification that you need to do. So that makes a difference. How did they find their sample size? Well, this means that they at each particular sample, they went out ahead of time, and they were finding that the curve of new samples at each sample was increasing until they got to a certain number of samples, and they found out they weren't getting any more new samples after a while, and they found that as their sample size. Okay, that's a good thing to know. If they were getting all of a sudden, if this curve was going never stopping and leveling off, that would mean that they hadn't stratified this well enough, that was too heterogeneous to sample it. If you found out that it leveled off right at the beginning, that would mean, no, you didn't need very many samples because this is all reed canary grass and you only need 1 or 2 samples to infer that to the entire area. So it makes a difference, but how you do this though, in terms of if I'm going to measure what they did on this particular bank versus another bank, I need to know all of these things to make sure that we're comparing apples and oranges. And that's why I'm going to get to this concept of standardization. Okay, so now we're taking that information, we're putting it onto a web map application. This is just an example that was done in the Puget Sound area at Discovery Park in Seattle to make a vegetation map using the same kinds of ideas that we were just talking about. So this is where that data starts to become information. And that information then becomes things that resource managers can use to make intelligent decisions on things like resource planning, regulation, resource management. This is we could spend an entire college semester talking about this slide. So basically what we're just going to say, and Sarah's got some good things coming up in the future about this subject for future meetings, but I'm just going to say here, if you're a resource manager and you're going out and you're trying to design your mitigation and your actions and your recovery actions, basically let nature be your guide. What would nature want to be out here on this particular site? And how can we emulate it? Start looking for clues on what nature wants to be out there, and start targeting your restoration, not based on the ideal and some sort of pristine, idealized setting, but on what's more realistic in the types of habitats that are occurring under the types of disturbance regimes that you're working in. And and also if you're targeting a brand new site that's initially starting out, you want to take the concept of succession into play. You can't really lay down a pristine late successional forest into an area right out of the gate. It just isn't going to work because you can't get the shade tolerant plants to survive in these initial setting plantings and whatnot. Anyway, we'll leave that at that for now. So stem density calculations. It's really a pretty simple math. You're basically adding the number of stems in each sample plot. You're summing all the stems and all the sample plots and dividing by the number of sample plots to get a mean stem density. You're finding the area of your sample plot by measuring the square feet of your sample plot by the acre, just number of square feet in an acre. And you're dividing your mean stem density by the area in your sample plot to get your stems per acre over here. And if you got 2 transects, you're just averaging your transects to get that. Okay, that's pretty simple arithmetic. Well, what does that mean? That means that you know what they're doing out there and how to go out and check it and see what they did. And one of the things you want to look at, this is a data set from from the Linton Mill site. One of the things that red flags right here, one thing is they're not meeting the performance standards of 1,200 at a minimum of 1,200 stems per acre. It's less than that, but even more than that, you'll see that here's a tree, here's a site, here's a woody plant that has a height potential to be a tree. Here's another one that has a height potential to be a tree. Here's another one that has a high potential tree. Here's another one. But there's another one tree, but here's one that can never be a tree. Here's one that can never be a tree. Another one can never. You've got to mix together. You've got high potential for shrubs and trees. It's giving you the same that wants to be a forested zone. Well, what if you only had, maybe you're only getting 5 stems of trees out there and the rest are shrubs. You could still, based on the mixing these, you could still conceivably meet your performance standard. I find that possibly problematic. So I'd want to know more about why they did that way for this particular area. That's a question that I would have going into reviewing their data and asking them and explain to defend they're saying that, yes, this is meeting the performance standard. Yes, we can release credits and sell those credits.
John, I just wanted to let the audience know I know this is a lot, this is pretty heavy hitting, but if you have any questions, please put your questions in the chat so that we can be able to, let John answer those when he's done after his presentation. So if there's anything that you have questions about in the presentations, please put it in the chat. Thanks.
Yeah, and really, my main reason is not that you should remember all of this, although as Michael just said, I'm more than happy to answer the questions on any of it. And there's all that, also the contact or the URL information I gave you that you could drill down and look at that, more information about it too. But the main thing I want to get here is that there's a lot of complexity going on in these measurements to find performance. And that really the only way you can really get a handle on all that complexity, no one's going to be able to keep this in their head. You're going to have some sort of automated database management system to do that.
And John's info is in the chat as well, with the links that were on the slide as well. So that information is in the chat as well.
Great, thanks, Michael. And so I'm not going to go through the same calculation for the different layers, but I just didn't say here that you are actually having an example where they are meeting the performance standard, and it is an all shrub zone, and they're just using shrubs in their analysis. The 1600 acre came here. That's a DSL standard, Oregon Department of State Land Standards. That's, I've got that in that threshold, high, medium, and low threshold stem density there. But really the way you judge whether this is meeting the performance standard is their mitigation bank instrument, and their mitigation bank instrument gave them a minimum of 1200. So this one would be meeting their performance standard for that one. Okay, and then percent cover is really, as I said before, looking at the cover class, those midpoints that we were looking at, and seeing how much of the circle is covered by those vegetation types. But really, the negative spaces are important too, the bare ground, and I'm going to emphasize that a little bit in the next slide. Here you see all of these samples with no vegetation on them. They're completely bare soil. Well, that sort of sets up a red flag. And I'm looking at this data here, and I want to go out and find out why all these samples don't have any vegetation on them. And if you go out over to the next plot over, you see that they're obligate hydrophytes, obligate plants, this Lythrum portula and this Eleochris palustris, both plants that are exclusively 99% of the time, you see them in very wet site conditions. So that leads me to believe the sites right next to that plot may be the same thing. And I know this Lythrum portula is a very highly invasive, non-native invasive plant, and it really loves that very wet, moist habitat to colonize and take over. So I've got that red flag here. Is I want to go out and look at that and find out if that's really what's going on out in the field, because we want to catch us early if we can to make sure that doesn't take over. The other thing we got going here is we've got a fact up species that's not often found that often in wetland conditions. It's fine showing up. It's in the same sample as these obligate wetland plants. Is that a misidentification issue? Is that because that they've got this sample plot right on the border between an upland and a wetland, or is it because the site recently got wet? What's going on here? I want to look at that. So these are red flags that somebody in a regulatory position can look at, and when they're going out there and finding out whether or not this site is meeting its performance standards. And there's just an example of how databases help us keep track of all this stuff and calculate these numbers automatically and provide us with reports so that we can connect this data and make this from becoming data and put it into information that we can use. I offer these two metrics up here, a moisture index and a weed index, mainly because, and the Portland Harbor people say, well, this isn't part of our evaluation. We don't have a moisture index and a weed index in our performance evaluation. Well, my take on that is that they don't need to give it to me. They've already given it to me because this data is well known. This up here, these numbers are well known. As long as they've given me a species list, a percent cover, I can calculate this moisture index. I don't need to have them do it for me. I can do it automatically in my database because I already have this all set up. All I need to do is plug in their species and their percent cover, and I can automatically calculate these metrics. Why is that? Why would I do that? Well, again, the database helps it make it very easy to do. Okay, once I got that data plugged in there, the database clicks out a report, gives each one of these samples a moisture index and a weed index. And I've got it geographically referenced with this lat long data, so I know exactly where these plots are in the real world. And now I can take spatial analyst tools, and I can take that information, that data, and I can interpolate it and create these maps that now translate that data into information that resource managers can use to make intelligent decisions on resource management, planning, or regulation, or a whole host of questions, but are based on intelligent decision making from real data. So another thing to understand is that vegetation is not just a horizontal situation, it's a vertical situation as well. And there are metrics that you can use to create indexes the same way we did with those metrics for the weed index and moisture index. We can do the same thing for a height index that takes into account the diversity of heights, the diversity of vegetation classes, or herbs, shrubs, trees, the diversity of species, the relative dominance of species based on percent cover and height, and take that and convert that into a numeric metric. And then we can put that into a database, and it can do the same kinds of conversions that we did for the other metrics and help us convert that into a useful output, a report. And this is taking two separate data sets, one for vegetation and one for bird use of the same habitats where the vegetation index we're taking, and then remarking that the relative, for 1 year's worth of bird data of observations in those habitat types, and the metrics that we use to establish the relative importance of those habitat types to one another in those structural statistics, and the relative use by birds comes out pretty close. That's could be has a lot of underpinnings. That could be a very useful tool for decision makers when planning restoration and mitigation. And again, showing another report how this has been done up in an area in the Puget Sound and Discovery Park in the city of Seattle. So here's another take on why it's important that how you design your database is important. This is 2004 data, 2005 data that I took out of the trustee website and downloaded. It was a table, and because it was geographically referenced, was able to import it into a file geodatabase, and then from that I could put it into an ArcMap project and display this geographically. And then I can, and obviously that's a very powerful thing to be able to go into a particular site location and then open it up and see what's going on in the attribute tables here. So for the polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons in this particular sample. But one of the things I tried to do the same thing for the 2018 data, but because it didn't have a unique identifier field in the table, I couldn't use my SQL query to glean out the data and put it into my geodatabase. And so it really makes a difference in how users can use this data by having these design questions answered up front and done correctly. I'm not going to go into what all these different terms mean right now, but I can answer those questions if you have them later, or you want to talk to me over email or over the phone. But it is important that these things are answered, and that there's a lot of input from the stakeholders, the users of these databases, when these things are being designed, to make sure that they're useful and we can get the full functionality out of them. So here's my my take. There's no one way to do this, and you get 5 or 6 different resource managers and experts in the same room, and you can. I tell you that the conversations will not only get convoluted, they will get heated. People will get upset if you don't understand their particular way of doing things. But But you've got to do it. You've got to come together and you've got to compromise and you've got to find one way of doing it for the entire area of interest that you're going to be sampling. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense to try to compare sites with one another. Yeah, if you're using different methods and metrics and ways of measuring things, you've got to do it. And I can't overemphasize this. You've got to get together with all these guys and make sure that they can get them to agree on one standard way of doing things. Right now, I'm not convinced they've done that. I'd really like to know more about that. I've asked the question, haven't had a good answer on it yet. Here are some other types of things you might look at real briefly in terms of things that are associated with vegetation performance, substrate, hydrology, and fish and wildlife use, in this particular bird counts. So this is a summary of the issues that I've identified that I've got open to the trustee council, to the Environmental Protection Agency Data Management Committee. So basically, I would like the core Ribbits Cyber Repository to start putting all the documents that I know have been developed for these banks. I want them to put them in there so that everybody can get in there and look at them. And not have to go to the DSL state FOIA process like I did to have to look at them. I would like I would like EPA to do the same thing. But you know, if EPA decides they won't do that, at least get it in Ribbits. I would like, and especially if EPA is doing the 404 credit debiting accounting methods for their particular regulatory interest. So I would like to have all these this export ecosystem services environmental justice question. Remember, I showed that multiple site mitigation bank. I think that could get at that by ensuring that the Portland Harbor has adequate representation of different sites that are being recovered along that corridor for the anadromous migratory species that are moving through it. Have accessibility to the digital data. I just don't want this data in PDF formats where I have to manually take it out and put it into digital format. That takes a lot of time and a lot of effort, and is prone to error. And so I would like to have that digital information right out of the gate. I'd really like to understand this discount rate logic that NOAA is using. I think it makes a difference in terms of how credits are evaluated and debits are evaluated. And I think that it's not too big of an ask to ask them to explain that logic. They're not saying they won't, but we're on hold on that right now. I would really like to have a definite, yes, we will hold this precautionary minimum to 1-to-1 acreage, and we will make you make that verifiable by putting the acreage next to the credits and debits as each of those transactions occur in the ledger, so you can have confidence that that's the case. I would like to have the spatial data disclosed so that we can find out where these debits and acreages are being debited against our accounts. You know, just like when you go to account, you want to know where that $25 came out of your checking account, where what that was used on, and where it was at. You want the same thing for these debits for our credits and debits. The location question, we just talked about that. Affordability, I think that's an important question in terms of we getting some sites that they're saying, well, we got to cap it. We can't take it out of there. It's too expensive. Well, given the amount of money they've got in their credit, the value of their credits, I'm not sure I'm convinced that's the case. I guess I'd want to have I would think the resource managers would have a conversation about that. This unique identifier, so we can adequately query the data and get them into different formats that make it useful, so we can ask the right questions of it. I think that's not too big of an ask. I think there's a conventional wisdom that you'd want redundancy in your system. You want more than one keeper of the data, more than one data steward. I think EPA is a logical data steward. I think the Corps of Engineers is a logical data steward. You might even have a third party, not private nonprofit organization be a data steward. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I don't think redundancy is necessarily a bad thing. Once it's digital, it's not a big technological issue to get that into various places, and to have some sort of synchronization method where they're make sure they're all keeping the same information. I'm actually doing it on my website right now with the ribbits manually, but anyway, it can be done. So anyway, and then the relational database, enterprise geodatabase, graphical user interface, and having inputted that decision with those decisions with EPA, I would like to really hone in that I really think that they need to listen to the stakeholders while they're designing it, before they design it, and not make it an after the fact question of what we'd like from their database. And then finally, the standardization of protocol. Can't overemphasize how important that is. And basically, these are just the questions in straightforward language that I've put to the trustee council, and that they've given me assurances that they're looking at. And I think we may, even by the next or next meeting after next month or the month after that, actually have Lauren Sink here from NOAA Fisheries coming on and helping us answer these. I would like it if you do it, help us answer them before that time, but been waiting several months now. Would really like to have those answers as soon as possible. With that, I'll say basically the conclusion here is that if we do have proper oversight and enforced transparency, the mitigation banking can definitely be a great tool to have in the toolbox for resource recovery for Portland Harbor or any place else for that matter. But if it's not there, it can also be misused and become an actually impediment to resource recovery. And that's the danger that we want to try to avoid. And with that, I'll open it up to questions.
All right, John, thank you. Thank you so much. I know this was a lot for folks. It was sort of a definitely a collegiate class on mitigation banking, but we're grateful for it. We need these these deep dives. This work is moving at a steady pace, and we don't want to be left behind on what's happening in our community when it comes to restoration to the habitat with all of the work that's being done in Portland Harbor Superfund. So there was a couple of questions that we did have. I did answer one, what was the acronym for RIBITS,
Okay.
Regulatory in lieu fee and banking information tracking system.
Right.
There was a question about would the RIBITS tell me, I think this is from Laura Feldman, would the RIBITS tell me if the Linton Mill remediation site passed performance standards? Does the mitigation bank release credits for problematic remediation sites like Linton?
Okay, the answer to that question is no, RIBITS will not tell you that, because none of those monitoring reports are currently in the RIBITS database. The only reason I know I have their monitoring report for the Linton Bank is because I had to do a state-like FOIA, Freedom of Information Act request from the Oregon Department of State Lands, and that's how I was able to get it. But that's why I'm asking for the trustee council to put all that information into RIBITS. The question about how do they use that to release credits? Well, that's not as straightforward because what they do is they give you the report, but to the best of my knowledge, they don't explain what the exact process is by where their interagency review team, which is the trustee council, I believe, for the Portland Harbor banks for the circular credits and debits anyway, who they have going out in the field and fact checking these monitoring reports and then making the decisions for credit release. But we do know credits are being released already. That means, and we do know that they're being sold already from the RIBITS ledger. So the presumption you have to make, if credits are released and if they're being sold, then you have to make the presumption that they are meeting the performance standards. But how they're being brought to test on that is a question mark, and it's more of a black box than it should be. And
It's a big question mark.
Yeah, yeah, I agree completely. And that's one of the questions I've got to them right now.
Okay, we had one more question, just a quick one though. If we could put the URL into the chat, and I have placed that into the chat in two separate areas because we had a few people who were here late, so I wasn't quite sure if they were able to get those links from earlier within the presentation. And John, I had a question that was, I'm wondering, you gave some great suggestions on how to move forward on this in the future with more transparency and access to the data. Is there anything that community members can do to kind of push this, to make sure that this is happening? Is there any suggestions that you can give members who are concerned about the recovery after this work is done? That it is, what can we do?
Thank you, Michael. That's a great question. And actually, that was my hope for doing this presentation, was to have that question come up. And I guess what I would say is that right now it's probably looking to the trustee council, and possibly, although I think Laura Knudsen understands this, that it's not just me that's bringing these issues up, that there is really a broader stakeholder interest here. But I think to the degree we can make that known to the regulatory and the resource people who are involved in these trustee council and the database management team at EPA, that really is a broader concern. It's not just one person bringing up these concerns. I think that adds weight to their willingness to perk up and take attention and take it seriously, and to get some positive, taking our feedback and engaging us in their decision process. So, and exactly how we do that, I think that's a great discussion that needs to be had. Anything we can create advisory groups or smaller groups, or there's a number of different ways we can collaborate to do that. And I'm more than willing to work with anybody whose aim is that. I would be very happy to work with those people.
All right, fantastic. Well, it starts here, so we'll be having more conversations about this. This is going to be a long process, so I'm sure we'll be revisiting this again.
Michael?
Yes.
Hi, this is Dana. Hey, I was wondering, John, if you could maybe send something to Michael's group, or the whole group here, and say, like, wow, we could really do with a letter writing campaign. These are the people I would suggest you write to, and I would suggest you hit these points. That might be something that would be very useful that people could do right away.
That's a good suggestion. I will definitely put something together like that.
Okay, thanks.
And then I wanted to jump in also, is asking a question is, are any of the nonprofit environmental groups that are involved with legal aspects of the environment, like Legal Defense Fund, or have any of those joined to help put pressure, using legal letterhead to make some of these requests, or to put pressure strategically on some of these items?
Not to my knowledge. I don't know about that. As a matter of fact, my overall impression, and I don't know if this is right, is that a lot of the private for nonprofits have sort of come up against brick walls in terms of the Superfund process, and are feeling frustrated and really don't feel like they're getting a lot of value added for their inquiries. And and I just think that if that's actually really the case, and I sort of felt like that when I started making inquiries, if that's the case for them as well, if really this process isn't just a series of lawsuits waiting to happen. And I guess I would, if I were this trustee council, and if I were the regulators in the Corps and EPA, I'd be doing everything I can to engage stakeholders and to get them involved in this process on these subjects. Because I think, I think as Michael was alluding to earlier, is that because it is a fairly technical side of the question. A lot of people aren't engaged in it right now, and that, but by having some sort of a segue into that, that might help build that bridge where that can be changed, and we can start moving forward in that with that being more doable.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, John.
Okay, and are there any other questions that we have for John on his presentation this evening? Don't be shy. There are no bad questions at all. So please chime in. And John, thank you so much. This was very thorough. And I really appreciate, we all do appreciate that you're able to provide the links to this so that it can be reviewed, and your contact information, so that if there are inquiries, we know we can reach out to you, and you'll be able to create some space for us to go a little bit deeper and on some of our questions.
More than willing to talk to anyone who wants to talk more about it, definitely, yeah.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
So if there aren't any more questions, then I'm going to go ahead and move forward. I do believe we have Susan Bladholm on the Zoom. Oh, hi there, Susan. And Susan's going to give us a quick update on Frog Ferry. And then after that, I believe Sarah may want to talk a little bit more about future presentations and just suggestions from our community that we have here. So Susan, I'm going to pass this on to you. And, you know, I'm not quite sure if we can make your screen a little bit larger, but people can see you. So
Great. I'm here. I promise. 6 feet
Yeah.
tall, you know, redheads. We don't shrink away very easily. And I love the alignment of going to talking about rivets to Frog Ferry. So, but John, super impressed by your presentation and your commitment to our community. So thank you so much for that. And many of you heard a pretty robust Frog Ferry update not too long ago, a couple of months ago, and we've hit a couple roadblocks, candidly. And Laura Feldman, bless her heart, went out and we did a walkabout at Cathedral Park, and she kind of talked me down out of my tree a bit. And then Michael, for about 90 minutes, and they said, you know, let's have you come back and meet with a group, and maybe we can help in some ways. And so I was really trying to just frame this up as a very informal kind of outline of where our needs are. And so really for the first one is the Infrastructure Jobs Act funding is coming down the pipeline. And there has been $50 million a year over the next 5 years for a total of $250 million allocated for ferries, just for ferry projects. So not competing for any other transportation project in our region, just for ferries. And typically Portland and Oregon doesn't get that fund. We as a nonprofit cannot directly apply for that money. We have to go through a public agency. So it needs to be the city, or which would typically be like a PBOT. It has to be ODOT. It can be a port authority. It can be a tribe, or it could be Metro. And we have had some real challenges with Metro, candidly, with a grant application we have in now. I was on the phone with them for 2.5 hours today, and let alone that's for a state grant. They won't go after federal grants. So yes, it would be great if they would, but they won't. So we are lobbying the city of Portland, and I met with Commissioner Mapp's office yesterday and Commissioner Mapp's this afternoon, and I'm waiting on time to meet with Mayor Wheeler. So I'm in touch with his chief of staff and Commissioner Rubio's office. And Dan Ryan, we really don't interface with his offices, but we could use help of people reaching out to city council members. And I'm happy to follow up with Michael to provide kind of an outline of where we could use some assistance in saying we want to get behind Frog Ferry. And ultimately, the project fund is for a pilot project, one vessel, move residents from St. John's and Cathedral Park down to the River Place dock. And I'm happy for any of you that haven't gotten the overview. I'm so happy to share that with you. And we also have a recording of the kind of the PowerPoint overview on our website. So that's one aspect we could use. And next week there is testimony to ODOT to say, yeah, we think Frog Ferry is a good idea, and we think you should consider allocating some of the $40 million to the Frog Ferry project. Our total amount for a 3-year project, 1 year of planning, 2 years of operation, in total is $9.7 million. So we have $2.7 million requests into the feds, about $1 million for tickets and fares. So we have about a $6 million net. And yes, we have a number of requests out to corporate organizations as well. So this is all coming together, pretty quickly now. It just opened up today saying next week we're going to have testimony, and ODOT wants to start hearing about projects that might be a good fit for this category. The other thing I wanted to mention for our friends from EPA, I know that Sarah and Caleb are on, is just looking at the soil sediment audits in the area. I'm very curious to hear the results of that, particularly because I have presented to this group and the neighborhood associations of St. John's and Cathedral Park, and worked with a number of local activists for 3 years on putting the stop at the Cathedral Park boat ramp. Portland Parks in December suggested that they want to move it to the south dock, which is the fishing dock. And so it being the Superfund and understanding PCBs, understanding the fact that that dock doesn't get already boat traffic because the piers are on the outside, I would like to know if the community is amenable to moving our ferry stop there. And it would be the equivalent of 5 stops in the morning, and our dwell time, so people getting on and off, is 7 minutes at a time. So it'd be 5 of those in the morning and 5 at night. So it's a total of 70 minutes a day for that. So we're just starting to put together a plan behind this. We've already invested years and a lot of money into looking at the Cathedral Park boat ramp. It does mean us coming in and taking some of the federal funds, and likely parks might have some money too to improve the dock. And keeping in mind, our long-term goal is we want to have a permanent dock at Green Acres there. And I'm so sorry, I'm going to miss Tim Wessel's presentation on the Mason Bees, because I love Tim and we worked together at the Port of Portland. So I think those were the primary things I wanted to bring to your attention here today. And if there are any questions that you might have for me, but just to understand, we really need a push from the community to have, especially ODOT commissioners. City Council's pretty darn supportive of us, but it would certainly be helpful to say, hey guys, it's time to tap into these federal funds that are coming down the pipeline from this infrastructure bill to plug into a ferry pilot project.
Susan, let's see, it's Sarah. It really helps, I think, if you write like a sample for people and who to send it to. I mean, maybe you've already done that. And then it's easy for us to just forward that around. And, whether people should leave phone messages or, sometimes that's easier, but whatever you decide. But I think if you have something that we can email around, we can get it to go far and wide this weekend.
Thank you. I so appreciate it. And it's very new. Actually, it just popped into my inbox today. So I was just going to socialize this, but the fact they're now saying there's an opportunity to provide testimony next week. I mean, I think that popped in my inbox at about 4:30 today. So Sarah, I will follow up and do that and send it to Michael to share. So thank you for that suggestion.
Yeah, that will be helpful.
Yeah, and this is Caleb. In terms of the sediment sampling results, our time frame for that is spring of this year. We should have some data that will help kind of answer some questions you may have about what the sediment looks like in the area.
That would be great. And I would love to just schedule time to talk with you and overall just if you're compelled by this move with parks or not. It's one of those things where we've said from the get-go, we are really agnostic about where the docks go. We want it to be in the best interest of the community. But what we heard early on was really that boat ramp, knowing it gets so much use from fishermen and recreational boaters anyway. So we've had, several years of conversations with the Oregon Marine Board and ensuring that we wouldn't have our passengers impeding traffic, we wouldn't be inducing parking. So we've had this really lovely relationship with them. And as recreational boaters, they were excited about us coming in, bringing some enhancements to the dock for the 2-year pilot. And then we leave a better dock and we move to the permanent location. And I'm just concerned about moving to that south dock and contamination there and what the ferry, could churn up. So I just want us to really talk through this in a really honest way early on before we invest a lot of money, going in and putting together renderings for what a build out might look like. And when I say a build out, it's really repairing the current dock and stabilizing it and then putting in what's called a little flexi float. So it actually doesn't pierce the bottom of the river. It's actually held in place by the weight of spuds. And that's what passengers walk across from the existing reinforced dock over to onboarding the ferry. And I see that Julie's got her hand up.
Oh, and I apologize, Susan. I've really enjoyed what you're talking about, but I was hoping that maybe when we're all done, I could just make a comment on behalf of the trustee council.
Sure.
Oh, sure. You can do that now if you like, and then I can go to Barbara Quinn's question. So whatever's convenient for you, whatever you.
Okay, I certainly didn't want to interrupt Susan because I was really enjoying your presentation.
Okay, well we'll wait to the very end and we'll make sure that you get your statement for sure.
Great, thanks.
All right, cool. Okay, we have a question here from Barbara Quinn. She asked, Susan, what is the status of the federal grant application your group is trying for? What is the status of that application?
So Barbara, thank you for asking that. I think that's the current grant that we applied through the city in October. We were expecting to have an answer before the end of the year. And last week I reached out to the FTA back in Washington, DC and said, we're on pins and needles. When will you make this announcement? And they said it's been delayed and they'll announce that in late February or early March. So we have that one out for the 2.7 million. Now we want to go for the infrastructure bill. And it was just announced to take testimony. So I don't even know when that will open up, but we've been told by the Passenger Ferry Association of America to be ready and have our ask really kind of framed up by the first week in March.
Okay. All right. Are there any more questions for Susan or any inquiries about Frog Ferry? I think this is timely. We are in a climate crisis. If we can get more cars off of the road, the better it is. Vancouver downtown is growing exponentially, and people are. You can see the traffic on the I-5 bridge. It's high time for Portland to have some alternative, use our rivers. And this also will allow more eyes on Portland Harbor too. So I see this as a win-win. We want eyes on North Portland, and we just only see this as a boom and making sure that, the repair to Portland Harbor Superfund is, has the eyes on it. So so if there's any more questions, if not, then we will. Oh, I see Laura has a question.
Yeah, I have a question. Oh my gosh. Just specifically, Susan, the ODOT testimony that you're asking for, is that just written testimony, or I've never been to an ODOT hearing, so to speak. Do you want people to come and speak?
Well, typically it's a mix, but I think most of it will be written. But it does seem like those we participated in the past have been even recorded and televised. So we try not to have 20 people testifying,
Right.
but 3 to 5 really hitting on different topics. So oftentimes we'll have a youth climate activist, and they will have their perspective, and like our board chair really feels strongly about connecting marginalized communities to the downtown core and good jobs. So his is more of a workforce message. So we try to split that out. And then, I think it was Sarah's question is we typically will send out like, here are 5 different key message points, and then you can pick whatever one is closest to your heart and customize it to send out.
And also the piers, having to move over to the fishing pier. I just, that just seems so strange and rather infuriating, honestly. Do you want us, maybe you'll put this in your form letter, but do you want us to advocate for the boat launch, the one that makes sense?
It's really, I think I appreciate the question. It's really not as relevant for this. I think that the first place we need to start is I really wanted to talk with the EPA friends here to just get a sense of their being open to that. And we do need to see what the audit is. But, if we're going to stir up PCBs there, then we need to get back to Portland Parks and say, knock it off. This is not a viable location. It's so trying to figure out how we can apply the science to it, because we have 9 regulatory agencies really on the federal side we work through, and then we've got 8 different city agencies. So the city agencies aren't saying, we really care what the regulatory agencies, are going to say. And I'm like, we do though. We have to all care about this. We all have to come to a solution together that's going to work for everybody. So that's kind of where we get caught. And that's what I'm really trying to be very practical and inform all the agencies. So we're all in this together, trying to come up with a solution.
Susan, I just want to say that I know you walk around Cathedral Park a lot. They have put so many apartments right on that park. And I know somebody said, well, how will people get down there? But right now they're putting that huge housing apartment on the other side of the bridge. And I think they have put so many new people right there. And so this transportation will be very relevant to them. So I just want to remind you that the housing increase on Cathedral Park is substantial, especially that new family housing by Catholic Services is just huge. So anyway.
Yeah, Laura and I were there a couple of weeks ago and walking through there, and I was just right across the river from there yesterday at a fabrication place where we may end up doing our overnight home port. And so looking out from that vantage point and seeing the new builds, it was really remarkable. And it's exactly what we're talking about, Sarah, is looking at, even like OMSI's they're planning on putting in 1,300 new condos, waterfront there. And Vancouver's got another 2,200 coming in. And that's why it's having residents come in and say, I don't have to own a car. I can go ahead and traverse the region without a car is what this is all about. And so knowing and seeing the rezoning of the waterfront there in Cathedral Park, and this was 5 years ago. And, I think it was Bureau of Planning and Sustainability said, we're expecting 10,000 new residents into the St. John's and Cathedral Park neighborhood. And it was like, we already love this neighborhood. It's why we started here, but knowing that there's that growing density on the waterfront makes it all that more important of the place where we're starting.
Yeah.
And I also took the liberties of putting the overview and feasibility presentation on YouTube into the chat, and also the Frog Ferry website. If there's any other contact information that you want to add in there, Susan, you can place that in there too.
Thank you, Michael.
Were there any more questions that we have for Susan? Okay, all right then. Well, if there's if there's not anything else you want to share with us, I can give you a few more words, and then we'll go on to any existing questions for either presenter. So we'll just open it up for questions or statements for either of our presenters this evening.
We have Julie.
Okay, all right, Julie.
Hey, thank you guys. So my name is Julie Wise. I chair the trustee council and I'm an attorney, so not a technical person like Mr. Marshall or Lauren Sanker or any of the people at NOAA. And I guess I represent the Siletz tribe. That's my client. One of the trustees, and I just want to tell you that I'm really sad that there is a sense that the trustee council has been less than transparent with the CAG, because we have nothing but the utmost respect for the CAG. I mean, you guys are so engaged, you're looking out for the public, you're looking out for natural resources, and I just think you do a tremendous job. So I applaud you, and I apologize to the extent that we have somehow, made you think that we're less than transparent. I remember before the pandemic, every year we would come and talk to the CAG, and most recently, I think it had been Lauren Sanker from NOAA and me, and we would bring restoration project implementers along to talk about their projects. And I just remember thinking we all seemed to be sort of on the same page and pleased with the way things were going. And not that we didn't have our bumps along the way, of course. But I really do think at Portland Harbor, we have some great restoration projects. I can assure you that these credits don't get released unless, the various project standards are met. So we do have good oversight, and, we take seriously Mr. Marshall's concerns about, a lack of transparency. I think a lot of times people aren't interested in this kind of stuff. It's highly technical. Mr. Marshall's presentation kind of drove that home, right? It's really complicated stuff. But over the back and forth with Mr. Marshall and with other folks, and we realized that you really do care and you're really interested and you want to understand a lot more of this stuff. We have been reaching out to you, Michael. I think Lauren and you were talking about an April presentation at the CAG from the trustee council, where we would do our best to bring some of the really technical folks who are involved in HIA and try to answer a lot of these questions that you all have posed to us. So I just want to assure you that we're not trying to hide the ball in any fashion. It's hard during the pandemic, to make sure you can have your interactions. I miss being with you in person. And I hope someday we can do that again in the near future. But until then, just, I hope we can all stay safe. And we look forward, I hope, in April to coming and, trying to answer a lot of these questions and making sure that you feel like the restoration that's happening at Portland Harbor is really good. All of the projects, even if, you have concerns about certain projects, just, we'll do our best to answer whatever we can.
Julie, thank you for that. That's very encouraging. I really appreciate your having said that. Is there any reason why we could not have some sort of communication before April? Is that April a date for some significance for having that communication, or is there something we can set up before that if possible?
Mr. Marshall, why don't we talk about that offline? I know that you did before this presentation say that, you hope that perhaps regardless of when we were going to present at the CAG, that we have something like that. Let's see what we can do. One of the things that's really important to us, and maybe this seems silly to some folks, we really try to be even-handed about the sharing of information. So Mr. Marshall is a highly, he's a technical guy. And so, it's difficult to put information out in the public that can be misunderstood, misrepresented, or in some cases even be misused by somebody who's trying to get a leg up in some negotiations. So we're very careful. And I say we, particularly the agencies like, NOAA, who are working on this stuff, and they're very careful about making sure that it's equitably shared. And so, Mr. Marshall understands this stuff, but a lot of people aren't going to. It's going to be confusing. And so that's why we think it's important to, come to a CAG with technical experts so that we can have everybody have access to the information at once, and in a same forum on equal grounds. But having said that, Mr. Marshall, certainly we'll talk about this and see if maybe there are some of these questions in particular that are, nice and discreet that we can just answer for you right off. So let's see what we can do on that. And I really appreciate your interest in all of this, because there aren't many people who really get into here.
Well, I appreciate that. And I just want to reemphasize that I have not asked for anything that none of the other mitigation banks in Oregon are being asked to do.
All right. Appreciate that.
Oh, thank you for that statement and your comments, and we hope to continually work with the Trustees Council. We think it's important for all hands on deck. It's going to take all of us to basically get this work done, and this is your home just as much as it is ours, and we love our community and we love our river where we're at, and we want the best for it. And if we can, as much transparency as we can get, and seeing that our river is beautiful and accessible, that's basically what we want. Is accessibility and have a healthy ecosystem in our neighborhoods. Thank you so much. Are there any other announcements, questions from our presenters, statements, or anyone would like to share this evening?
Well, I just want to remind people to put in the chat anything that they would like us to, to maybe schedule if there's something that is appealing to people. You can see it was a wide variety: frog ferries, salmon habitats, more technical things. Like we try to do a variety, the University of Portland, so if there's a topic or a person that you think would be great, we would love to have you tell us, and also love to know what some of your favorite topics were last year. It's helpful to us. We also do tours, just to let you know, and we'll probably be doing some tours as the weather gets nicer. So if people have ideas for a tour they'd love to see, you could throw that in as well.
Yeah, so don't hesitate to reach out to any of us at our email address, which is on our announcement that we send out. My phone number, you can text me or call me, is also on the announcement for the CAG. So don't be shy to also provide us with any comments. If there's any comments that you would like to share with us, something that you're happy that we're doing, or something that we may need some improvement on, we are open to that. Are there?
This is Scott Bird. Hey, we have another question in the chat from Darice.
Sure. All right, yeah, here's Doris Wheeler. This is to you, Susan. Are there any plans for transportation on the west side of the river, particularly to alleviate some of the Highway 30 traffic and transportation to some of the other riverside industries for employees?
Thank you. I was typing away trying to address it. So thank you for that, Doris. There are 10 proposed stops. And again, the stops aren't something that Frog Ferry comes up with. This has been working with PBOT, ODOT, Metro, and TriMet. Said, here's where we think there's the greatest demand and where we have opportunities for the greatest connectivity at that first and final mile. So how do people get to and from the dock is really critical. So when you say to the west side of the river, if you mean like directly across from Cathedral Park off Highway 30, we don't have plans for something right there. I mean, that's largely industrial. We're really looking at connecting major residential centers with major employers to kind of start. So we just have to be able to really be filling this ferry of 70 passengers. We've had a number of like senior centers located on rivers saying, oh, could you do that? We want occasional, trips. And it's like, we really, first and foremost, we're focused on commuters. But Doris, I'm so happy to talk you through that. And we actually did demand modeling that we needed to have to substantiate the stops that we've first focused on. But it's a very good question.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that there. Okay, any other questions, either in the chat or unmute yourself? Okay, well, all right. I think if there's not going to be anything else, I think we may adjourn this meeting this evening. I just want to say thanks to our presenters. Susan, thank you so much. Julie, thank you as well. And John, thanks so much too for all the information. It's been a great learning experience tonight, and we're excited about everything that's happening on our river, and we can't wait to really start to see things moving and shaking on the river and getting things cleaned up. It's already happening, and so even though there are some bumps in the road with Frog Ferry, we know we're gonna pull through this, and it's gonna be really exciting in the long run. If anyone, like Sarah said, has any suggestions, anything that you would like to see in the future, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. And we wish everyone the best 2020 as possible. Just remember to take care, look after each other, and we'll be seeing you in February for our February meeting. Everyone take care of each other, and we'll talk to you soon. All right, good night.
Good night, Michael.
Thanks, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you. Thanks. Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you. Thanks, Laura. Thanks, Scott. Thank you for all your help, bud.
Bye, good night, Michael.